Behavior interventions to improve performance in collegiate football. Studies have shown that when presented in both public and private forms, feedback can have a significant effect on the behavior and motivation of individuals. The purpose of this study was to determine whether the use of multiple types of feedback would have a direct influence on the behavior and performance of 3 collegiate football players in practice scrimmages. This study took place on a football field at a 4-year liberal arts college in the Midwest. Practice sessions lasted 2 hours each day, 3 days a week. The participants included wide receivers who were perceived as constantly showing poor execution and abilities at practice and game days. There were 3 dependent variables measured: blocking, routing, and releasing. Firstly, the percentage of correct blocks was used to measure whether the wide receiver properly blocked. A correct, effective block was defined as the wide receiver checking the progress of a defending player using legal means, for example, not holding or shoving the defender's back. Second, the wide receiver's proportion of correct routes ran was utilized to assess if he'd followed the predetermined path during an offensive play. The player's route was compared to the coach's playbook to evaluate if it was correctly executed. Lastly, releasing was measured. Whether the wide receiver released freely from the line of scrimmage was measured by the proportion of proper releases. The release was marked as proper or free if the receiver avoided contact started by a defender and began running the prescribed route. The effectiveness of the treatments was evaluated using an ABA-CABC multi-treatment withdrawal design. Prior to treatment, the players met with the coach in the baseline phase to discuss the expectations for each dependent variable, blocking, releasing, and routing, and then practice. The coach provided the participants with verbal feedback and error correction during practice. During the AB phase, public posting and verbal feedback was given. Prior to the next practice session, a player data chart was posted in the locker room. The coach also continued to provide feedback and error correction. During the AC phase, the coach and each player created goals together. The coach also continued to provide error correction and feedback verbally. In the final phase, ABC, all 3 treatments, public posting, goal setting, and verbal feedback were provided collectively. To determine social validity, the 3 participants were invited to complete an open-ended questionnaire. The questionnaire helped researchers determine whether the interventions were feasible, produced any undesired consequences, and if the treatments needed to be adapted in the future. Findings showed that with participant 1, during the AB phase, had an average of 80 to 90% accuracy in blocks, 80 to 100% in routes, and 90 to 100 in releases. During the AC phase, he had an average of 90 to 100% accuracy in blocks, routes, and releases together. Lastly, during the ABC phase, he had an average of 90 to 100% in blocks, 100% in routes, and 90 to 100 in releases. With participant 2, during the AB phase, he had an average of 80 to 100% accuracy in blocks, 80 to 100 in routes, and 90 to 100% in releases. During the AC phase, he had an average of 90 to 100% accuracy in blocks, routes, and releases collectively. Lastly, during the ABC phase, he had an average of 90 to 100% in blocks, 100% in routes, and 90 to 100 in releases. Finally, with participant 3, during the AB phase, had an average of 80 to 90% accuracy in blocks, 90 to 100 in routes, and 90 to 100% in releases. During the AC phase, he has an average of 80 to 100% accuracy in blocks, 90 to 100 in routes, and 90 to 100% in releases. Lastly, the ABC phase, he had an average of 90 to 100 in blocks, 90 to 100% in routes, and 90 to 100% in releases. During the ABC phase, All participants remained at 100% accuracy for all variables and at least 85% of the time. For any additional information regarding the study or football wide receiver techniques, please visit the following websites.